My name's Gregg. I'm a public health nutritionist with the region of Waterloo, and what that means is I'm a registered dietitian, but I also have a master's in applied human nutrition. And so I'm going to talk to you today about diet quality in Canada, which Leia already covered because we didn't talk beforehand, and then about Health Canada, what it found in its scientific review, and what was said in the consultations, and what I think we'll be expecting in the new food guide. So do Canadians follow the food guide? If you ask them, the updated stats are actually that 80% of people will tell you that they actually have a diet that's good, very good, or excellent. This is not an uncommon thing with the human population. Just to give you an example, when we ask people about their driving habits, you'll be happy to know that there are only excellent drivers in Waterloo region. And all that stuff that you see elsewhere, they're just not from around here. So in Canada, the measured diet quality, when we look at objective diet quality, what we know is that 0.5% of the population actually follows the recommendations in Canada's food guide. If you are over the age of 14 or under the age of 55, it's not you. So essentially, the more control you have over your own diet, the worse it gets. So at the age of 14, we're pretty independent, and that's when things start to fall apart. So why are we not meeting our diet quality? Well, it's partially because we're not getting enough of certain things. We're certainly not getting enough vegetables and fruit, but it's also because we're eating things called foods to limit. So foods to limit are things that are high in calories, fat, sugar, or salt, and as Leia showed you, they're the ones that are more accessible to us. The problem that I have with Canada's food guide is that they use kind of abstract language like foods to limit. So what does that mean? Does that mean that I should only have them with each meal and not in between meals? Only before bed? What does it really mean? And so if we talk about things like moderation, right? I hear that all the time, everything in moderation. Can anybody tell me what that actually means? So when they looked at diet quality in Canada study, what they found is that if you were to follow the recommendations in Canada's food guide, there are 0 calories left over for foods to limit. So they set moderation at about 5%, which is about, for an adult, about 100 calories a day. So if you stop by your favorite coffee shop and have a double-double, you have 2 days worth of moderation right there. So what are we talking about foods to limit? It's things like cakes and pastries, chocolate and candies. Maybe I'm not as fun as I think I am. Cookies and granola bars, ice cream, frozen desserts, French fries, potato chips, nachos, and salty snacks. Alcohol, right? You all heard me say alcohol, right? Fruit flavored drinks, soft drinks, sports drinks, energy drinks, sweet and hot drinks, that includes coffee and tea, and sweet and cold drinks. So when we look at the recommendations, it is no more than 5% of your calories. And as a dietitian, I don't really like to think about calories that much. I'm just speaking in a way that I can quantify it. But our actual intake is about a quarter. And that's just based on what people tell us about. So if anybody knows anything about diet surveys, what happens?
Forget what they actually.
They don't forget, they just lie.
They just lie.
They're eating healthy on those days.
Yeah, so when it's food diaries, they eat really healthy on those days. When it's food recall, they just lie. So anyway, based on the lies that we know, it's about a quarter. So what do we know about Canada's food guide? And this is something that's very, very important as far as I'm concerned. If you look at, other than the first iteration of the food rules, very little of the recommendation has changed over time. They've always really emphasized vegetables and fruit, and they've always tried to minimize certain things that were less nutrient dense. So what should be reassuring to people is that the scientific evidence hasn't changed that much. So they basically said it really affirmed our position on sodium and trans fats. We really want to have 0 trans fats in the food supply. And then the recommended diet pattern is still eating more vegetables, fruit, whole grains, low-fat dairy, and seafood. Doesn't that sound fun? And eating less red and processed meats, refined grains, and specifically sugar-sweetened food and beverages. So we also know that Canada's food guide is really, really hard for people to wrap their head around. And probably this is why a lot of people assume that they're already following a really healthy diet. So we've got the number of food guide servings per day, and Leia showed you the slide that had the what is one food guide serving. And often when I show people this, they look at it and go, I couldn't possibly eat that much in a day. There's just far too much food. So then you look at the actual serving sizes. Humans have something known as a unit bias. So if I said I had a bottle of juice, my brain says 1. So this is 1 juice, and most bottles of juice are 3 to 4. And this is 1 pasta. Fits nicely in the palm of your hand. And most of the time people eat anywhere between 4 to 6 servings, which you can see is about your entire day's worth of grains. And when it comes to meat products, we usually eat all of today's and half of tomorrow's meat products at a time. So in the United States, they looked at this kind of, because they used to have the food pyramid, and they looked at how consumers really understand it. And what they found was they don't. And so this is a really poor way to go about telling consumers what to eat. So for myself as a dietitian, this is an excellent tool because I understand it and I can translate this into what an individual could eat with their help. Like, this is what your diet pattern should look like day to day. But as an average consumer, this is a lot of work. You'd have to remember what all the food guide servings look like. You'd have to keep track of what you ate throughout the day, and then alter your diet throughout the day to make sure that you were eating an adequate diet. And we know that obviously that's not happening. So what are we expecting as far as changes come? So when they looked at it, they're updating information on alcohol, saturated fat. It turns out some whole grains are more helpful than others. So what the food industry has a habit of doing is adding things like pea fiber to the food so that on the nutrition facts panel, it looks like there's a lot more fiber, but from a physiological standpoint, it's probably not doing you any favors, so it's kind of misleading in that effect. Red and processed meat. So a couple of years ago, the World Health Organization declared processed meat as a group 1 carcinogen, meaning that they know that eating a certain amount of processed meat will lead to colorectal cancer, which in the world of nutrition is actually quite something to be able to pinpoint one type of food to an actual outcome, because diet is so complex. So that's actually very meaningful for us epidemiology nerds. They're also updating soy protein and added sugar intake. So the United States did quite a bit of research on what is meaningful for consumers, and so they came up with their plate model, which Canada then recreated for our food guide. So what's really meaningful here is that it very clearly shows you that half of what you eat at every meal should be vegetables and fruit. It's very easy to kind of conceptualize that. And if you eat off something round, you can kind of go, yeah, half of this should be vegetables and fruit, whether you mix it up or not. So I'm expecting more consumer tools that look like this. They're very easy to look at what you're eating and decide, am I on the mark or not? The other thing that they did this time around is they really tried to keep industry influence at arm's length. I'm hearing across the board, across Canada, a lot of dietitians are hearing from consumers that they don't believe in the food guide because they basically think the industry wrote it, or that Health Canada just basically did whatever the industry wanted. So as I was saying before, there's not that many expected changes to the recommendations in Canada's food guide, which shows the stability in the science. So this time they showed they had a process where you could email in your comments. And so it really kept everybody in arm's length. It's like, the science is the science. What do you have to say about it? We're not going to negotiate the scientific aspects of the food guide, but if you have ideas for the tools or whatnot, that's very interesting. So they definitely wanted to reassure everyone that they do the food guide based on science and not industry influence. And lastly, Canada's food guide, as Leia was talking about, this time around is probably going to have a lot more guidance about how to eat. So rather than just simply saying this many grains and this many vegetables and fruit, it's also talking about things like eat with others, enjoy your meals, eat whole unprocessed foods as much as possible. And as Leia very clearly demonstrated, food choices are not simply a matter of personal choice. So a lot of times when I talk to people, they say, we'll make healthier food after you educate people, and then they start to demand it. But we definitely know that humans are vulnerable to the food environment, and it's for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, a certain proportion of us are very food reward driven. So when I encounter something, you'll notice that you react very differently between a piece of broccoli and a cookie, right? I could probably put a plate of broccoli in your workplace or school environment, and it could literally sit there until it grew something else on it. You'd have to be very hungry before you really dug into that, untouched broccoli, right? But when there's cookies, it's a whole different thing. Your brain's like, look at those cookies. Susie had a cookie, so she just lowered the threshold of what's socially acceptable. How much exercise did I do today? Can I think about, did I burn it off, which is a concept that I really dislike very much. And so you start to go through all the reasons why you can rationalize this. And so we have this moral licensing effect. So I can convince myself, based on certain criteria, that it's perfectly okay to have a cookie. And it goes something like this. I had a really hard day today. Cookie. It's Friday. Cookie. It's my birthday. Cookie. It's your birthday. Cookie. And so you can see how things get carried away. And so then on top of that, the part of your brain that drives willpower, it's known as executive functioning, it's not really great at doing a number of things at a time. And there's only so much mental energy fuel to go around. So has anybody ever heard the term hangry? Right. So there is a part of your brain that we call the filter, which goes, don't say that, right? And it makes you act in a socially appropriate way. Some people have better filters than others. Right? But when you're hungry, it turns out that your brain actually runs on blood glucose, and so when you're hungry, your blood glucose drops a little bit, and then the filter is gone, right? And the same thing goes for food. And what's really, really unfair about food is that we put all of this very tempting food in front of people, which activates the part of your brain, the reward center. So broccoli does not, but cookies do. And that's why you wouldn't notice healthy food so much, but when you see something, you're like, hey, that's your brain's reward center, right? Same thing happens with people like drugs of addiction, like cocaine. So the same part of your brain lights up. And so then you're trying to tell your brain, now brain, we don't need that, but you're hungry. So the part of your brain that drives willpower is less effective. So essentially what we're doing is we're asking people to use their willpower at the exact moment that their willpower machine just ran out of gas. And that's why people can wake up in the morning with all kinds of affirmations about, I'm gonna eat healthy today, or today's the day I start my new diet pattern, or whatever you tell yourself. But at the end of the day, when you're standing at the lunch counter and it's burgers and fries special, and the person in front of you just ordered that, that's what you're probably gonna order too. And that's why we can know, myself as a dietitian, I've spent the majority of my life studying nutrition, and yet I can still fall for unhealthy food at a moment's notice. So knowledge and education will not get us there. We actually need to start changing our food environment so that it's possible for people to overcome that, and it's called changing the defaults, so that maybe the special of the day is actually healthy, and you have to ask for fries and pay a little bit more for them, and actually that's been shown to be very effective. But I'll stop there.